once I have the bottom rectangle or slab cut out, now I'm going to be working on the wall pieces to my box. So this is an example of what it is you're going to be building using the stamp that you carved with your design on it. So the stamp is going to get pressed into the clay to create the textures on the outside of your box. And I'm going to show you how I went about doing that. So I have rolled out a second slab of clay, and I rolled it so that it was wide enough to fit that stamp that I made. I'm just going to check for any air bubbles. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my stamp over, center it, and now I'm going to take my rolling pin, and I'm just going to start to use kind of a medium amount of pressure. I'm not pushing as hard as I can, but what I'm doing is stamping that design into the clay. So remember to kind of push a little harder on the corners, because those often get left out. And then what you can do is slowly pull this back to make sure it was printing. If it didn't print, then roll on that area again, and that one printed really nicely. So now what I'm going to do is take my fettling knife, and I'm going to cut along the edges. Okay. So now this is going to become the wall pieces to my box. I'm going to leave it like that for now. I'm not going to worry about all these texture marks that came from the low spots on my stamp. I think they're pretty cool. I like it. The texture starts to make it feel like wood, which I think is really interesting. But this needs to dry a little bit more, and then if you decide you don't like the rough texture, you can start to smooth these out with your finger. But this piece is wet. It's floppy, so we want this to be a little more leather hard before we do any smoothing, so we're going to wait for that to dry. So I'm going to put that on top of my project board and push it under the table. Okay, so now you're going to repeat that 2 times because you need 2 of this size to be the walls, and then you've got a small stencil that's going to be your short walls. Now I've already cut this out, so I'm going to show you how we do this. So if this is the wall to my box, I have to make sure that I have this piece of clay turned in the same direction, or the correct direction. If you notice, these 2 are the same height. If I turn this the other way, it's going to be too short. So make sure that they are the same height when you go on to do this next step. So now what I just basically have to decide is, do I want this half of my stamp, or do I want this half of my stamp? And it's just really your preference. So I'm going to line up the edge of this stamp like this, so it should line up on 3 sides, top, bottom, side. And then what I'm going to do is get my rolling pin, and I'm just going to roll that into the clay. I'm using about medium hand pressure. Let me peel it back to check that it printed, which it did. I can already tell. So now what I have to do is double check that this piece still matches the size of my stencil, and it is going to stretch as you press into it. So I'm going to trim off the extra sides so that this stencil still matches. And then I'm going to take this piece of clay and I'm going to put it on my chair. So you can remake anything as often as you need to. If some of the walls get misshapen or you turn it the wrong way, that's perfectly fine. But what you're going to need is 2 of the long rectangle, which is the regular size of your stamp, and then you're going to need 2 of the short rectangle, which is half the size of your stamp, to begin. Before you can start to build your box, you're going to need those rolled and cut out.